This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 259, Maintainers Support Project. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Drupal 9 is now out while most commonly used modules are ready or will be ready soon. What about those modules that haven't been maintained in a few years? How do they get handled? Well, in comes the Maintainer Support Project. We have Damian McKenna and Greg Boggs joining us today to tell us all about that. Welcome, Damian and Greg. Damian McKenna is a community lead at Media Current. He's a maintainer and co-maintainer of many projects, including Metatag, Backup and Migrate, Panelizer, Twitter. The list is long. In the past year, he's had 577 issues fixed, and that was as of about a month ago, so I expect that number's higher now. When he's not behind the keyboard, he's active in the Drupal community, and he resides in New Hampshire. Welcome, Damian.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think this is a return visit for you on the show.
Yeah, I was here a few years ago to talk about the Metatag module.
Metatag module, that's right.
Stuff.
Well, welcome back. We also have Greg Boggs. He's currently fun-employed. I can't wait to hear what that means because I'm fun-employed as well. He's a co-maintainer and active contributor for many projects, including Easy Breadcrumbs, Share This, and Current Page Crumb. He has a master's in information technology and management from Illinois Institute of Technology and currently resides in Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with what is fun-employed?
Well, it's unemployed, except I still work on a lot of important things like Maintainers Project.
Ah, great. Okay. All right. I'm employed and I'm having fun, so I consider that fun-employed. And joining us as usual is John Picozzi from Oomph. John, what's happening with you?
Well, this week I am prepping for next week, which is funny. I'm actually taking part, I think I've talked about it before, in Oomph's sabbatical program. So essentially starting the end of this week, I get 4 weeks off. And as part of that time off, I'm going to try my darndest to read a book. And if you're a regular listener, you know that reading books is not something I do well, seeing as I've been reading the same book for probably about 6 months or so now. But I recently got People Powered by John O. Bacon, which is a book about community building and how community building can help your business. And I started reading it just kind of like out of the blue, picked it up, read a first couple of pages, and it kind of really drew me in. So my goal is, my sabbatical is solely focused on spending time with my son, but in my downtime, I'm going to try to read the whole book in 4 weeks. We'll see how it goes.
Have you divided the number of pages by 4 weeks to see if you're ahead or behind?
Well, you and Nick are giving your updates. I'm going to do that, and we'll see. I've already started reading it, so I'm actually a little bit ahead of the game, I think.
All right.
Is there going to be a Gantt chart to go with it too?
No,
you got to get serious about this.
We're not going to get that involved, but there could be like at the end of week 4, there could be severe cramming happening.
Joining us as usual is Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Development. What's new with you, Rick? Sorry.
We're gonna edit that out afterwards. Don't worry about it.
Not too much. We had a big storm a couple of days ago. Isaias, I think it was named, and we lost a few plants. It ripped up some of our garden, unfortunately, but others survived. And I think the only other kind of interesting thing, I got an email today, as I'm sure a lot of you guys did, from Google. Google Plus was part of a class action lawsuit. Apparently, they leaked a bunch of information, and everybody's entitled to $12. Apparently, up to $12.
Sorry, what's Google Plus?
Google Plus was their attempt at taking over Facebook.
That was a joke. You fell for it.
Talking Drupal was on Google Plus, so Talking Drupal might be part of that class action.
Yeah, it's funny. The first like 30 or 40 episodes, I think we recorded on Google Plus.
Yeah, and I think we there was a small community there too. I mean, it was definitely a different social media platform. It did some things pretty cool, but it's also good to see, even though I think the amount is kind of laughable as all class action lawsuits are. It's good to see that people are starting to really pay attention to digital rights, and it's not just like them leaking the information, it's also giving other developers access to stuff that shouldn't be public, which is the case here. And how about you, Stephen? What's new with you this week?
Yeah,
he's back.
I'm back. So you guys had a great show last week without me. So if you haven't listened yet, it's about responding to RFPs, episode 258. Had fun editing and listening to that. It was interesting to hear you guys talking and me not saying anything, and I kept like wanting to say something as I was listening. It was a strange experience. But yeah, it was a great show. My trip was fantastic. For those who don't know, I drove to Arizona 2 weeks ago in 4 days and helped my daughter set up her new apartment, stayed there for another 4 days and flew back. So the highlight of my trip is probably trying to avoid getting coronavirus while I was gone. So 20 minutes before the show started today, I got the call from my test results and I'm negative. So I'm happy to report that. I do have a blog post with some details from my trip for anyone who's interested. So I won't go into the long details here, but just to follow up, 117 degrees, dry heat is still hot, John. It's still hot.
I much rather prefer the 117 to the 90 with 100% humidity that we had here.
I don't know, John. I've lived in both. I'm going to tell you 117 degrees is hot. And it doesn't go away. At 10 o'clock at night is 106. So it's very steamy. You just don't go outside.
Draining.
There's no one outside there. The streets are empty. And yeah. But yeah, it was a great experience.
So to get back to your question, Stephen, 70 pages a week.
Okay. All right. So we'll be looking for next week. You should be in the 80s or so, right? Since you already started. All right. We'll check in on you. So Greg and Damien, we usually give a weekly update. So if you have anything to share about anything interesting in the Drupal world or in your personal life you'd like to share, this is the time. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I've discovered over the past few months is I've been learning how to play chess. And as I understand it, chess has become one of the most popular new games on Twitch.
Really?
Simply because a lot of folks are stuck at home and there's very few sports that you can actually play from home. And chess is one of them. Professional chess has actually gone online. They're not official tournaments by any means, but they're very exciting and there's large prizes and it's a very interesting sport to experience. And for me, last week, I realized that chess gave me a way to spend time with my close friend that I haven't seen in months. And we spent the time more than 10 feet apart, and yet it wasn't awkward because we both had smartphones and a chessboard, and we played a game of chess and chatted about it.
That's a great idea. Does anyone else play chess?
Sometimes. Not as much as I'd like, but yeah, I enjoy chess.
Not in a long time, now that I think about it.
Yeah,
I stopped playing when my 13-year-old started beating me.
There you go. I mean, is your you have a son, Greg? Is that right?
Yeah, I have a 10-year-old.
Is he playing chess?
Convince him to learn, but he doesn't find it that impressive yet.
Oh, okay.
We're actually my 7-year-old and I play a lot of Monopoly.
Okay. Another game that's probably gotten pretty popular over the last few months, right? Another surge.
Yeah, I don't know.
How about you, Damien? What's new with you?
So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a webinar / event from Kim Creighton of #causascene.com, all about anti-racism and related topics, and it was really eye-opening. And she's continuing to do a series of events related to the topic, kind of going in different directions, and it's going to be really good to see how the future ones go.
All right, so let's move on to our main topic for today, which is I want to get the name of this right because I'm not sure I called it right probably at the beginning. Is it Maintainers Support Project?
Yeah, so on Drupal.org, Damien, I believe, named it Maintainers Support Project.
Okay.
And this has been talked about on the Drupal Association blog. And when I wrote the blog for the Drupal Association, I called it the Maintainer Initiative. But essentially, it's a community-driven project either way. And I don't know that the name is super important, other than maintainership is really the most important idea that we want to convey.
So what is that idea? What is this project all about?
Well, there are two different sides to the same coin. So on one side you have, well, I'll talk from my side. I've been involved in Drupal for some time, and I maintain a number of modules and have picked up a number of others along the way, and have worked with lots of very talented people who have not had quite the same drive to get that deep into contributing to the Drupal community, which is fine. But I've seen several people who were in a situation where they were, say, juggling 3 or 4 patches on a given module, trying to make it work correctly, and realizing that they would probably save themselves a bit of hassle in the long run and the client maintenance overhead if they were to take an additional step and join as a co-maintainer to help polish up the module and get those patches committed, etc., etc. And I found people generally to be very reluctant to take that step. In some cases, it's a belief that, well, I'm not good enough to do that, and despite the fact that they definitely were. In other cases, it is not being sure of how to do it, what the steps are, what the amount of dedication you have to give to it, etc. So being concerned and confused about the processes involved and documentation and that initial learning curve. So I wanted to provide support to people to help them get over that initial learning curve and help direct people to good ways of, what I found to be good ways of maintaining projects. And on the other side,
it's actually extremely similar. And my personal interest in module maintainership is Drupal.org did a massive effort when we launched Drupal 8 to port Drupal 7 modules to Drupal 8. And about 4 years ago, there was a very large development effort pushing forward all of those modules. But many of the smaller modules have stayed on GitHub.com or on GitLab or in various places in patches in the issue queues. So we have completed Drupal 8 modules, ready to go. They work. They're fantastic software, but they're not polished, published on Drupal.org, cleanly documented, working with a stable release. And as we launch into Drupal 9, many of those Drupal 8 modules aren't making the jump with the automated fixes for Drupal 9 and the various improvements that come with having your software on Drupal.org. So I started the Maintainers Initiative with Damien, simply because our interests are so closely related. It gives us a nice structure to get more people involved than just Damien and myself, and give them a place where they can ask questions, they can participate, they can get involved. And I think, to add to what Damien was saying, another big barrier that new contributors face is they don't know where to get started. If they have a big moment of motivation, maybe they go to a sprint day, maybe it's their first time contributing. One of the big questions that I get frequently is, okay, Greg, this sounds fantastic. What exactly do I work on? And the answer has always been, well, go find a module that needs help. And so the one key difference here is that we've started curating a list of modules that have work that needs to be done that can be extremely impactful with a very small amount of time spent. And then I've done a little bit of legwork to make sure myself or Damien or someone else kind of involved with the project has access to actually publish that work and release it, so that when someone does contribute, they immediately see their contributions published on Drupal.org and ready for the public.
So this is like one of those kind of meta projects that Drupal occasionally, comes out with. We had Moshe on a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, maybe now, talking about Drupal spoons. This is kind of in a similar vein, helping maintainers kind of manage their workflow. And so I'm always curious, how did this project come about? How did you two kind of get connected and find out that you were aligned and decide to put something out to the world?
I think it was it Twitter or a different discussion in Slack? I occasionally get asked questions by people on how to maintain modules, or I'll spot somebody who has adopted a module and doesn't know the processes. So, for example, they'll commit things straight to the repository. They won't give the proper attribution in commit messages, and they need a little help finding the right ways of doing things. I forget exactly how it came about, but we got chatting. I think it was Twitter, just kind of one of those crossroad meetings, and decided to put our minds together and start it up.
So, I mean, at its most basic form, right? It's essentially a support group for maintainers and co-maintainers, as well as an initiative to just maintain modules better going forward. Is that a fair way to summarize it? Yes,
absolutely.
Everybody's nodding for those audio listeners.
Thank you.
So, I mean, when did this get started? Because, to me, I'm kind of like, why hasn't this existed all along? So, like, when did you guys start this initiative, or when was it, I'm using air quotes, official?
Damien started the project page in May of 2019. One of the interesting aspects to creating a project for this is that it made what used to be our private conversations on Twitter or in a private message in Slack, it made those conversations public in a way that people who are interested in this topic can join in or read or participate in. And one of the people who at least listens to our conversation and does help us when we get stuck is the technology director for the Drupal Association. He helped me publish a blog post explaining our effort and our work and sharing it with a much wider audience. The project actually hasn't changed as far as whether it's official or not. It's essentially Damien and myself just creating a little bit more of a framework and some support for people to contribute to Drupal. It's definitely a community-driven initiative. I think at some point we might encourage the Drupal Association to support us a little bit more directly. But I think right now we're in a super early stage of seeing where this can go. And I really want to see how successful we can be at bringing new people in, providing support for maintainers, especially as we go into the Drupal 9 launch. And there's a lot of excitement getting modules working for Drupal 9. And I think through that process, we'll find out what support we might need from the Drupal Association. for me personally, for example, I spend a lot of time just emailing people who worked on Drupal 8 4 or 5 years ago. And they have software that they've published on the internet that I don't have access to because it's on their GitHub account, or they posted a patch but didn't publish all of the software and those sorts of things. So I do a lot of legwork just sending people emails. And usually when I send those emails, they add me to a project, or they actually just publish the module for me because I went through the effort to ask them about it. And that is enough to actually create some forward progress.
That's awesome. One question that comes to mind is, the idea of a maintainers or co-maintainer support group, right? Is there have you guys developed or do you plan to develop a maintainers like checklist or documentation that says like, hey, here's a handbook on how to be a good maintainer or co-maintainer?
That's one of the things that I personally want to really focus on. Though, of course, as Greg mentioned, I did start the project page a year ago, but life finds a way of giving you distractions at times. So I do want to work on the documentation and especially provide, I think, video tutorials of how to do a certain small thing. I think the combination of the documentation with video to go along with it would help people get over the learning curve a little bit better.
One of the questions that I actually have about your project, and one of the things that we've chatted about on this podcast a lot is, and I'm very curious about, one of the biggest things that changed between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 for modules, I think, is that so many more modules in Drupal 8 just stay in dev status or alpha or beta. Is one of the things that you're planning on helping with or planning on pushing is getting modules to a full release? Because I think with the security status, the security team doesn't look at modules that haven't had a full release. And I think, the whole community would benefit from I have modules, they're actively developed. They've been actively developed for the last 5 years, but they're still in dev, or they're still in alpha, or they're still in beta. And so they've never been reviewed by the security team. To
clarify something there, the security team doesn't review the modules themselves. And in addition to needing to have a stable release, you also have to opt into security coverage on the particular module. So you can have a stable 1.0 or 43.25 release or 4.3.25 with semantic versioning. But if you haven't opted into security coverage for that project, the security team does not handle security issues that are reported. So, but yes, there definitely is a need to help people get their projects stable and released and out the door.
It's a monumental task in the Drupal community to get our modules from their current state of dev releases into green, stable, ready for Drupal 9. Our effort is definitely supporting that. And driving some interest towards making sure more modules get to a stable release. And that is definitely one of the main things that we are working on. But when I say we're working on it, there are probably 2,000 or so Drupal modules that need polishing and stable releases created for them. And so inside the maintainers project, with a small group of us working together, we've created stable releases for 4 or 5 modules that really needed a lot of work. And we're going to continue doing that effort as we move forward. If I could wave a magic wand, I would love to say that we could support thousands of modules, but I think more realistically, over the course of the next year or so, I plan to support maybe 30 or 40 modules releases at the most. But having said that, doing 30 or 40 module releases sounds like an immense amount of work on its own.
Now, when you say supporting these modules, can you be a little bit more specific of what you actually do? Do you do anything to the module code itself to get it where it needs to be, or are you more greasing the wheels and helping the maintainers push along? Where are those guidelines for you in terms of what you actually do?
So when I started the list of modules that we were working on, that list is on our project page. It's in an issue queue on the maintainer support project, and I've added it to the project overview. And that list is publicly editable, so anyone can add modules to the list. But things that I'm looking for specifically are modules where the code has already been written. Some very smart humans have donated their time and written the most difficult parts of complex modules. And the pieces that are missing are things like publishing a release on Drupal.org, rolling patches in so that it works with the latest Drupal. So I'm looking for essentially low-hanging fruit or easier tasks where I can make a small contribution and get the module ready for Drupal 9. In often cases, the modules are ready to go. And the piece where the process didn't finish was the person who wrote the module doesn't have permission to publish the module on Drupal.org because that module was owned by someone else maybe 8 years ago. And so the step that needed to happen was that person has to get an email and we have to work out the permissions. So the biggest thing that I'm doing is really just that legwork of getting access to the project, figuring out where the code is, making sure it all works, getting the patches that have been sitting there waiting applied to the module, and getting them released. I think the patches pieces do really require a software developer, someone super familiar with patches and Git to do that part. But the basic work of just contacting the old module maintainer, getting added to the project, and then publishing the software that's essentially ready to go and already being used on hundreds or thousands of Drupal sites is not a super technical task.
So that actually brings up a question. I guess two questions for me. One, are you open to looking at projects that are maintained in Drupal spoons?
Absolutely.
Okay. And how much are you looking forward to Drupal.org starting to use a more modern, getting that GitLab integration so that you don't have to deal with the patching workflow? Is that something that you think will increase your effectiveness? Or do you think that the current patching workflow is working?
I'm super excited about merge requests on GitLab. For those who don't know, Drupal.org is adding support for merge requests or pull request style workflows where you can create a copy of a project and use a web interface to contribute to that project, which is something that's existed on other software platforms for many years, and Drupal hasn't had it. I'm very, very excited that it's going to make things like creating a release or accepting a patch much more streamlined and straightforward to do.
Or even not do because you don't need a patch file. It has been really great to see the Drupal Association's engineering team start rolling that out bit by bit over the past, month or so at this point. I look forward to future improvements. It was a long time coming, and it's finally getting here.
So, Greg, you had mentioned you're actively working, or I guess both of you have mentioned you're actively working with projects right now. Do you have a list of projects that you're either actively working with or that are in a queue to be worked with?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I believe CK Wright helped us with was creating a very straightforward spreadsheet, just creating a list of the projects that we have access to, that folks have confirmed interest in letting us jump in and help out.
Following up on that, how do projects get help? Like if I'm a project maintainer, I'm listening to the show right now and I'm like, I want these guys to help me out because, I can do better. How do I get added to the list?
Well, the first thing to say is that the list is a Google Doc, and anybody can go in there and add a project to the Google Doc.
We'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're going to add the link to the show notes for everybody that's listening.
The thing that I do want to mention, especially for my personal interest and a couple of folks who have started helping since the Drupal Association wrote a blog post about it, is that we're really looking for modules where a small amount of effort can have a large impact. So what that means is I'm intentionally not trying to work on extremely advanced modules, complicated modules that have a very large install base.
So are you not taking rules to Drupal 9? Is that what you're telling me?
The work that Damien does on meta tag is impressive, and I have no idea how he has managed to do that for so many years, because it's very important software, very advanced software, but it's used on so many Drupal websites that just wrapping my mind around the module and the issues and contributing to them is very difficult. So
wait till you see the views issue queue.
So I'm trying to focus on modules where the issue queue is just smaller. You know, maybe there's 20 open issues, and you look at a patch and it's 5 lines of code, and the problem is that someone needs to take that code and publish it.
So someone adds something. So our listeners are going to go and fill your spreadsheets up with hundreds of modules in the next few weeks. So you'll triage that list, go through it, and do some evaluation to say, hey, this is something that can stay on here. It makes sense. This module, the rules module, we're not touching. This is going to stay off the list, or you'll mark it as addressing that later down the road or something like that.
Yeah, so I don't really have a plan for that, simply because the list is pretty small right now.
Right.
If we did end up with hundreds of modules on the list, I would probably just sort the list.
Yeah.
Kind of looking for low-hanging fruit and move that to the top of the list. But the main task that I would do for just about any module that gets added to the list is go through the legwork of figuring out who has access to the module now, what state the module's in, does it have a Drupal 8 release ready somewhere on the internet that I can copy and paste and publish to Drupal.org, and then really get that triaged so that when we have amazing volunteers who have a day of contribution and they want to jump in and help, I have the perfect answer for them based on their skill set. If they want to edit a project page, I've got several modules that really need project pages updated and written. If they want to write some fancy software in Drupal 9 that doesn't exist yet, we've got a couple of modules where it's a straightforward problem and no one has really written that. And if we're looking for modules where the person just wants to help get things published and they're not a programmer, I've got several modules that really just need someone to roll a release following the make a release documentation on Drupal.org.
So you'd be a great resource for any camp or meetup that was going to do a code sprint night or weekend. They could connect with you guys and say, hey, we got a code sprint coming up in a few weeks. Can you guide us on some things that you'd like to get done?
That's it, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
So one thing that you've mentioned a couple times, Greg, on this show so far is, the primary focus of the first step is really contacting previous maintainers. And if those maintainers truly are, gone or not interested, there is an abandoned modules process. I'm curious if you've been able to get kind of fast track through that process, considering you're kind of helping herd the Drupal kind of ecosphere. It might be useful, if something's been abandoned, they haven't reached out, if you're able just to kind of take over and kind of do some of that shepherding. Is that something that you've considered or spoken to anybody about? Or do you think the Drupal Association would be open to?
Absolutely. Having said that, my experience in contacting previous module maintainers, if all I'm asking them to do is check a checkbox and I explain who I am and I give them some documentation so they know who I am and why I'm emailing them, the response I've gotten from former contributors has been amazing. And I have yet to come across a module where I had to follow up with an abandoned project request.
Okay.
For those who don't know, the Drupal Association and Drupal.org has a process where you can notify them that a module's been abandoned and request to become the owner of that module. It takes about 2 weeks or so, simply because the Drupal infrastructure team wants to give that previous maintainer enough time to reply and either add a new maintainer or recommit to maintaining the module. So if we come across modules where that's the problem, then I absolutely will follow the abandoned module request process. And that process really is as straightforward as me emailing the maintainer and then confirming to the infrastructure team that I contacted them and creating an issue. And then 2 weeks go by and they set me as the owner of the module.
I never realized it was just 2 weeks. I thought it was more involved than that. So yeah, that sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and if you look at my modules that I own, I did not write almost any of the modules that I'm the owner of. I simply requested access to the module through the abandoned process.
It's also worth noting that there are plenty of people who are in jobs where they, or for whatever purpose, they are actively maintaining something, but they, for example, go on sabbatical for 4 weeks, or have to, they fall ill and are in hospital for a while. There have been plenty of legitimate situations where people just fall off the map for a while and then come back later on. So were there to be a situation where the process wasn't followed and something was expedited, you wouldn't want to end up having something pulled away from you when you had the intention of continuing on it. That has happened before, and I can remember one scenario where it happened and there was a big blow up about it, and it led to problems that could have been solved through just some more open communication rather than somebody jumping the gun.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess I was thinking more about the modules that I think two things. One, I was thinking more about modules where the maintainer hasn't interacted with issue queue in months. Not really, like they just haven't interacted in a couple of weeks. And then the second thing is, I guess the abandoned process really is about giving you the maintainership, whereas I was thinking more of just like a process to give somebody a co-maintainership. But I could see, 2 weeks really isn't that long to wait in general, I think. And it makes sense to have the same process, I guess.
So how do you go through, how do you recruit developers to help you guys out? And what kind of resources do you need to help this project move forward in terms of people?
I think the key to recruiting new people is really the key that drives contribution to open source projects in general, which is the developer or the person, the user helping out with the software. They have to have a personal interest or personal problem that they are motivated to fix. So there are a few people in the community who are super contributors like Damien, who will jump in and help people with their problems regardless of his personal interest in that individual problem. But for most of us, it's much easier to contribute to something if it's fixing a problem that you have on your website, either for work or for a personal website, where that's a problem that's breaking your website. So that when you jump into Drupal to contribute to that module, you're fixing a problem that you have on your own work. And I think that really is the key to bringing contributors into maintainership support. Really finding a module that's impacting their work. They have a module with many patches that they're applying on a website that's important to them. And that really kind of drives their interest in getting that release out there, because it's taking them some extra time to make the release, but it's also solving that problem in their real work.
If someone came to you and said, hey, I love your initiative, I'd like to help out, I can give you 2 hours a week, how would you use a resource like that?
I think the first question I would have is really, what are you most interested in? Are we talking about editing the project pages and getting them ready? Do you want to work on releasing Drupal modules? Or are you a software engineer and pretty good at handling Git workflows and that sort of thing? And then based on your interest and skill set, we go through the list and look for modules that you either use or find interesting for a reason, and then figure out which one of those is useful based on your skill set. Mm-hmm. The perfect example is Chris from Phase 2. Well, the best thing that he did for me is make that spreadsheet organized and useful because he's really good at Google Docs. And before he had made that contribution, the Google Doc was not useful at all. So if you're listening to this and you're a Drupal developer, a programmer, the key thing that I would encourage you to realize is that any Drupal module on Drupal.org is public software, and just about anyone can contribute to that software and get it released stable to the public. So for a lot of people, you kind of look at someone's module as their software, and if it doesn't have a release, you're like, oh, I wish this had a release. And I think the big step to take is to realize that you as an individual person, even if you've never worked on a Drupal module before, can jump in and help make sure that module is amazing software.
You mentioned earlier, too, the Drupal 8 kind of module release initiative. So basically people would say, the Drupal 8 module pledge, people would say, I pledge to have this module Drupal 8 ready by the time Drupal 8 comes out. Obviously Drupal 9 has come out, but I'm curious if you have any goals for, number of modules you're helping make Drupal 9 ready for, like Drupal 9.1, for example. Have you put any thought into kind of timeline, time frame, velocity? Is that something that you guys have thought about?
My personal level of productivity usually amounts to doing 1 or 2 module releases a month. Having said that, with the exposure from the Drupal Association, we have more than a couple of new contributors that started maintaining modules once they got added to them. Having said that, I think starting a goal of more than 20 or 30 modules is wishful thinking. Having said that, it's a good idea, and the work needs to get done. So in an ideal world, we really could make sure just about every module with maybe 1,000 installs that has a working release ready to go on Drupal.org. As the maintainer initiative moves forward and we keep releasing software, as I make releases, we'll keep writing blog posts, letting people know the work that we've completed so that when people are using the modules, they'll find links to the maintainer support project and get involved themselves. The one thing I do want to add to this, and the reason why I'm personally interested in getting those Drupal 8 modules off of GitHub and back on Drupal.org, is because the Drupal community has written automated tools for Drupal 9. So if you have a published Drupal 8 branch with working Drupal 8 software on Drupal.org, the website will create an automated patch for you that improves the compatibility for Drupal 9. And for that infrastructure to work, we just have to get the code off of issue queues in patches and off of GitHub and get it published on Drupal.org.
In your experience, how well does that automated tool work? Like, what percentage of code does it fix? Is it 100% or is it 80%? What is your thoughts about that?
That is definitely a Davian question.
Okay.
So the automated Rector test, they call it. Yeah. It's from a tool called Rector that scans for known compatibility problems and then can fix some of them. They've, I think, estimated about 40% of the most common ones it can fix. There are lots of very common things like the Drupal Set Message, function that I still use and have to remember,
Right.
oh yeah, that was replaced. You'll find that strewn throughout code bases everywhere. And there are lots and lots of other simple things where just APIs are deprecated and there's a simple fix. So the automated tools will get you a certain proportion of the fix almost instantaneously because you're not doing the work and there's a bot just chugging along doing it. But
So I
then
guess
after that,
so it's sort of a motivator as well, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So you start making some progress and then somebody else comes along and does another bit and somebody else comes along and does another bit and eventually all of the things can be fixed and then you commit and now you're Drupal 9 compatible.
Before we close out the show, I'm just curious, is there anything we missed, anything that you think our listeners should know about that we haven't already covered?
One thing I found is that there is a huge amount of very simple work that can be done in project issue queues, just reviewing what is there between support requests and bug reports that say might be a couple of years old and out of date that just need somebody to follow up on to check to see if the problem has been fixed or somebody has gotten answers to the questions. Then you get into patches people have uploaded that just need somebody to review it to confirm that it works the way that's intended and is a valid improvement or fix or whatever. And that you never have to touch code directly to do. So if you're not comfortable dealing with PHP code or any other type of code, there's plenty of work to do to help triage things.
I have to say that reminds me of something that always makes me chuckle when I get a comment on an issue that I opened like 8 years ago that hasn't been touched. You know, the maintainer finally has come back around and is like, hey, is this still an issue? And it's like, I opened this issue 8 years ago. I don't even remember what project it was for. And 90% of my sites aren't Drupal 7 anymore. So yeah, I think even just, I think that, like you said, there's value even in just triaging some of that stuff just so they stay current and don't grow stale.
Greg, anything you'd like to add?
I think the last thing I would add is if you're a manager on an engineering team or a project manager or an agency owner and you're looking for ways to contribute to Drupal and get meaningful credit for that contribution and produce work that actually gets completed and published, the maintainership support initiative is really valuable for that reason. Because if you have a single sprint day of 24 hours, it's really difficult to kind of finish software and get it published so that you can write about it on your agency's blog. It really does take kind of an ongoing commitment to finish that work and make it valuable to the world so that it's valuable to your company. So by participating in the maintainer support, we have the infrastructure ready to go so that if you send a team member over to us and you want completed work that you can tell people that you've helped contribute to, we can absolutely make that happen.
If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal, by email at show@talkingdrupal.com, or in the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. You can also get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
This is the first time I was muted when I wasn't supposed to be. I like the record to reflect that. We'd also like to thank our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you are a patron, then you will get a private feed with the raw show unedited, which gives you a little bit pre-show and a little bit of post-show. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron.
Thank you for joining us, Greg and Damien. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, how would they go about doing that, Greg?
The best way is on Drupal.org. at Greg Boggs or on my website, which is gregboggs.com.
How about you, Damien?
So I've got the contact form on Drupal.org with the username Damien McKenna. You can find the links off of the projects I maintain or any of those bunny ear icons that bounce around you should use. Or find me on Twitter.
What about this project specifically? Do you have a channel on the Drupal Slack?
We do. It's the maintainers channel. And you can find that through the channel search.
Great. Thank you. How about you, John? How can people reach you?
They can reach me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can check out the new umthink.com at umthink.com.
And Nick?
You can reach me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
I'm Stephen Cross. I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. I can be found on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
And whistling.
And whistling. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.